Welcome back to this explainer on the long trip, focusing right on the prologue and Act 1. So picture this: 4 friends, 0 budget, 0 actual preparation, and they're about to take on the entirety of South America. You've got Elliot, right? He's your hyper-organized planner type. Thinks a fresh clipboard and a tight schedule can literally fix anything. Then there's Zach. Zach is just pure, unadulterated chaos. Way too much confidence, absolutely 0 geographical knowledge. Oliver is the exhausted realist. He's the guy regretting the whole shebang before they even pack. And then there's Max. Max is this stoic enigma who kind of just exists on an entirely different plane of reality. Together? Yeah, they are spectacularly unprepared for what's about to hit them.
So how does this whole ordeal kick off? A spinning wheel on a phone app. Seriously. Zach wants to visit some fictional nation he saw in a movie to find quote-unquote golden elephants. Oliver just wants to sit in a quiet library in Iceland. So they compromise, spin a randomizer, and boom, it lands on South America. The stakes here? A brutal 3-month expedition across a massive continent, funded by what Elliot calculates as 1 week in Spain money. Like Oliver so perfectly points out, they aren't explorers, they're basically just homeless people with luggage. If you've ever tried planning a group trip on a tight budget, well, you can already feel the disaster brewing, can't you?
It's actually hilarious how differently they process this impending doom. Take Elliot. He's got this meticulously detailed clipboard going, complete with a literal analysis on projected humidity and its effect on morale. To make their tiny budget work, he ruthlessly cuts their housing allowance to 0. 0. He opts for transport where the seats are, quote, mostly attached to the floor. And then you look over at Zach. He is completely unbothered by trivial little things like international borders, language barriers, or money. He's writing purely on vibes, genuinely believing he can just sleep standing up like a flamingo.
Okay, so cut to a local cafe where this terrible idea suddenly becomes very, very real. Zach, vibrating with excitement, casually knocks over a glass of water. It slowly floods the table, just completely soaking Elliot's frantic, heavily highlighted research maps. And this is where we truly understand Max. As the water ruins literally everything, Max does absolutely nothing. He just sits there, perfectly calm, folding a tiny paper crane. He even notes that the water wanted to be on the floor anyway. He finishes the crane, sets it on a tiny, dry island of paper, and is just completely unfazed by Elliot's total panic.
All right, fast forward to the morning of departure. The rapid decay of this group's dignity, it accelerates hard. By 6:12 a.m., the group chat is a full-on disaster, mostly because Zach is asking if passports count as liquids. 7 a.m. hits, and Elliot is frantically zipping and unzipping a bag that honestly looks medically significant. He's adding pens to a case that already holds 3 pens. At 8 a.m., Max shows up with a bag that looks suspiciously empty. Why? Because he, quote, doesn't like carrying things. And then at 8:30 a.m., Zach confidently video calls them from Terminal 5, which is super unfortunate because their flight is absolutely not out of Terminal 5.
Miraculously, they get Zach to the right terminal and head into airport security. Now, Oliver explicitly tells Zach, do not touch anything. What does Zach do? He immediately reaches out to touch something. You literally cannot overstate the absolute absurdity of what happens next. Zach reaches for a security guard's equipment, there's this sharp crackle, a noise like a bee having a total breakdown, and Zach hits the floor, tased. He actually insists he's fine while lying there twitching on the linoleum, proving over and over that his legs no longer work, while his friends just watch in sheer, exhausted disbelief.
And the dialogue that follows? Pure comedic gold. The security guard, Paul, just looks down at this twitching traveler and states, completely flatly, "You reached for my bum." Zach's defense? Delivered weakly from the floor while his muscles are involuntarily spasming, "I was curious. It looked lonely." Honestly, this is the baseline level of judgment Zach is bringing to a 3-month survival expedition.
Somehow, they actually make it onto the plane. But sitting right there between them like this looming threat is the number 16. 16 hours in the air. If you've ever survived a long-haul flight, you know this is exactly where sanity goes to die. Stuck inside a metal tube with a group that has already suffered a tasing incident before even leaving their home country. At first, everything seems okay. Oliver is intensely watching the safety demonstration. Elliot is aggressively organizing his seat area into highly specific zones.
But then, Max disappears. Just gone. For hours. Nobody has any clue where he is until the plane starts descending and the flight attendant demands the passenger in the lavatory return to their seat. The door opens, and out steps Max, completely naked. He's not rushing, he's not embarrassed in the slightest. He steps out into the aisle with the calm demeanor of a guy checking the weather on his front porch. The entire cabin just freezes in absolute horror. Max blinks, says, "Oh, right," and calmly steps back inside.
Now, Max refusing to leave the bathroom creates a massive secondary problem. Zach desperately needs to go. While Zach's internal organs are basically threatening to unionize against him, he's trapped next to Rohan. Rohan is this overly enthusiastic passenger determined to talk for the entire 16-hour flight. So, as Zach is bouncing and clenching, literally fearing for his life, Rohan cheerfully interrogates him about anime. Sweating, breathless, and totally panicked, Zach lists Japan as his third favorite anime, accidentally insults Rohan's shirt in the process, all while staring longingly at that occupied bathroom door.
Eventually, they touch down in El Salvador. The heat hits them the second they land, just like a damp, heavy towel straight to the face. The doors open, and Zach practically surges off the plane. He is power walking at a frantic pace that screams suspicious behavior. He reaches the passport control desk, trembling, sweating profusely, just desperately trying to calculate how much time his intestines have left before total, catastrophic failure. So the border officer, Arnav, asks the totally standard question, "Is there anything you wish to declare?" Zach's panic brain completely misfires. He blurts out, "I need to release something. It's been fermenting." And then he wildly gestures to his own body, accidentally warning a border officer of an impending quote-unquote explosive threat. Officer Arnav, obviously taking this in the worst possible way, immediately detains Zach in a back room for making terroristic threats. Meanwhile, Elliot is vibrating with anxiety, and Oliver is seriously considering committing a minor crime just to feel something.
Right when it looks like their grand trip is going to end in a holding cell in El Salvador, an absolute miracle happens. Rohan, the anime-loving passenger from the flight, he just cheerfully wanders into the security office and vouches for Zach. He confirms to the officers that Zach isn't a threat at all. He's just painfully, incredibly stupid. Zach is released, deeply humiliated, but not before Rohan leans in and extracts a blood-packed promise. Someday, to repay this massive debt, Zach is going to have to wear a maid outfit for him. You literally cannot make this stuff up.
Finally escaping the airport, the guys arrive at their very first accommodation. It's this cheap, dimly lit hostel room. Smells faintly of cleaning fluid and damp concrete. But honestly, to this group, it feels like an oasis. Elliot immediately starts unpacking his clipboards, drawing deep comfort from rigid organization. Zach just reverently flops onto a creaky bed. But Max carefully sets his suspiciously empty bag down and chooses to lie perfectly flat on his back on the raw concrete floor, hands folded, completely ignoring the empty bed right next to him.
When a deeply exhausted Oliver asks why on earth he is sleeping on the concrete, Max drops this beautifully cryptic explanation. The building breathes differently down there. He says it with such absolute, unsettling sincerity that nobody even attempts to argue with him. It sets this strange, slightly eerie atmosphere right over the group. Suddenly, the quiet, uneven rattle of their single ceiling fan feels less like a breeze and a whole lot more like a warning.
The next morning rolls in gently, which honestly, the group should have immediately recognized as a trap. It is time for the climax of Act 1, gathering supplies for their upcoming 12-hour bus ride into the total unknown. The contrast here is wild. Zach struts into the local grocery store with absolute bulletproof confidence. He claims he now contextually understands Spanish after being in the country for, less than 24 hours? Meanwhile, Oliver is trailing him down the aisles, watching their basket fill up, his silent dread mounting with every single item Zach cheerfully tosses in.
Let's talk about what they're actually packing for a 12-hour bus ride in sweltering heat with 0 guaranteed toilets. It's pure disaster fuel. We've got a loaf of sweetbread that Oliver rightly points out will immediately ferment in the heat. There's something ominously labeled energy paste, a deeply suspicious powdered mix called Tropical Power. Max randomly grabs an unmarked mystery item just because it, quote, feels right. And then, the crown jewel of terrible decisions.
The meat. Zach proudly walks out of that grocery store into the blazing Salvadoran sun, holding a package of vacuum-sealed meat. The crucial, absolutely horrifying detail here, the meat is warm, and it is actively sweating inside the plastic. Zach waves off everyone's concerns. He declares it's perfectly shelf-stable and that he's going to make a massive sandwich out of it later on the bus. It is literally the pinnacle of cultural overconfidence and absolutely terrible survival instincts.
Watching Zach proudly hold this biological weapon up in the sun, Oliver delivers a bleak, utterly exhausted prophecy that perfectly caps off this disastrous supply run. He just says, That sandwich is going to end us. It's the moment they realize their biggest threat in South America isn't the jungle terrain or the wildlife or the language barrier. No, their biggest threat to survival is their own terrible decision-making. It's a stark reminder that sometimes the worst element of travel isn't the destination, it's the people you pack with.
Which brings us to the night before the bus ride. Picture this scene. They're back in that dark hostel room. The only light is the tiny, faint red dot of Elliot's charging battery pack. Outside, an unforecasted, steady rain starts streaking against the window pane. Inside, that single ceiling fan cuts slow, uneven, stalling arcs through the pitch black. Everyone is lying in their beds, except for Max, obviously, who is still on the floor, and nobody can sleep. There's this quiet, lingering dread settling heavy over the room. It's the collective realization that this trip hasn't even truly begun yet.
As Oliver lies awake in the dark, counting the uneven rotations of that stalling fan, Max's voice drifts up softly from the concrete floor. He drops this ominous premonition. Tomorrow's going to stretch. When Oliver asks what that means, Max simply replies, longer than it should. It's such a chilling note to end the night on. The wrongness is already there. It's quiet, it's waiting, and it's stretched super thin across the hours they're about to face.
And guys, that is exactly where Act 1 leaves us. 4 wildly unprepared friends, armed with sweating meat, a couple of paper cranes, and a severe lack of funding, waiting in the dark for a bus ride they already know is doomed. It really just goes to show that confidence without competence is a recipe for absolute disaster. Which leaves us with one lingering question. What exactly happens when they finally board the long trip? What fresh disasters are waiting for them on that bus? Join me next time as we dive into Act 2, because trust me, you absolutely will not want to miss the chaos that follows.